treating the body without the concept of energy is treating dead matter. Looking back on it, I think they were just kind of like, yeah, we don't know what to do with this kid. I mean, you're just putting more energy into the system.
Where do you think the future holds as far as using electricity to heal?
I mean, I basically went from chronic pain for 2 years every day to 3 days, no pain at all.
Welcome back to Recommended Daily Value. I'm your host, Tyler Woodward, and today I had the honor of interviewing Dan Dixon. Dan Dixon is the vice president of a company called NeuX Technologies, and today we talked about his company's technology, which is an electronic stimulatory device. They call it the technology Interactive Neuromuscular Stimulation, that is very aligned with the bioenergetic and Ray Peat principles in terms of using electricity, or energy as he would call it, to heal the cells and heal damaged tissues. In this episode, we go into some of the nuances with that technology and how it differs from more traditional stim or electronic stimulation in the healing of injuries, and also how Dan got to where he is today, his history finding Ray Peat, and also a little bit about the body electric. Hope you guys enjoy. Dan Dixon, how you doing today?
Doing good, Tyler. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Dan is the vice president of NeuX Technology, and they have this really cool, how would you describe it, Dan?
I'd kind of describe it as like a next generation, stim modality is kind of the closest comparison you could draw to it. Kind of everybody's familiar with the classic electrical stimulation devices. It's one of our biggest challenges is differentiating our company from that sort of existing category, and it is so different. But of course, that's what people generally associate it with. So it's used for a number of different things. It could be athletic performance, stimulating athletic performance, recovery, injury rehab, acute injury rehab, chronic pain, neurological issues. It's really broad in terms of its therapeutic applications, but for the people who are kind of of the Ray Peat bent, it's kind of like sending energy into the system and using that energy to sort of create an adaptation and stimulate positive things to happen, more or less.
Yeah, and just to paint a picture for the audience, stim is basically like they put those little pads on you and they apply some sort of electrical stimulus. I believe it's a direct current, right?
Well, so it's a huge product category, stim in general. I mean, there's all kinds. There's Russian stim, there's galvanic stim, there's iontophoresis. I mean, there's more than I can remember, and they're all kind of different combinations of different waveforms. Some have direct current, some have alternating current. It's really, it all comes down to, what is the physiological or physiologic response that you're getting in the body, and how positive is it? And this just, happens to be a really unique combination of direct current and alternating current that I can get into it in some of our later questions, but it just has a completely different response in the body in terms of what it does to the tissue and how you can use it.
Gotcha. It's really interesting. I'm looking forward to diving into that. But just to start, how did you get introduced into Ray Peat, that world, and the body electric as well, which is a really cool book?
Yeah, for sure. It's a really interesting story to me anyway. I was, I always tell the story like 20 years ago, I was playing college football and got injured, and, kind of really put me down this path of, okay, I don't think, I fortunately got introduced to a lot of really just incredible people that helped me treat my injury and heal it, and kind of start looking at things from a different, I would say more holistic perspective, and sort of less reductive. And, so I'd tell people, 20 years ago, I learned that we don't treat the underlying cause of pain and injuries, especially in the US, right? And it always kind of gave me this bent of, okay, well, if we're not treating the underlying cause of these things, then clearly we're not treating the underlying cause of anything else. Like how could that be? That if we're not doing it in pain and injury, then we're clearly not doing it in cancer, Alzheimer's, and all these other degenerative conditions. It just was kind of this suspicion I had based on my experience and, kind of going from like changing my environment and, it making me so much of a happier, healthier person. I was like, well, this has to correlate to all the other degenerative conditions. There's just no way that it doesn't. I just didn't believe in, sort of the genetic determinism. And so I was kind of constantly digging from 2001 to 2011, probably, through just like reading about nutrition and health. And it was just, really a passion of mine to kind of try to uncover things that could, help me just kind of like in whatever I was trying to do, in my life. And help my family. And, my mom had had thyroid cancer at a certain point. My stepfather had a heart attack. Just had seen, I forget how many, different things that friends and family I saw suffer a great deal at the hands of the medical industry. So it just really sort of galvanized me to kind of want to dig deeper and look for, solutions for them, because it was just so heartbreaking kind of seeing them go through this stuff. And so I was in 2011, I think it was, I was living in, I'd played American football in the US, and had finished my career at Northwestern University in Chicago. And I had a bunch of friends that after school had gone over to Europe. There's kind of like some quote unquote professional leagues in Europe that are really just fun. And it was just kind of an excuse to live in Europe and travel and have more fun with football than we all had in college, I think, and travel a little bit, because, you really aren't afforded that luxury in college to travel and, have a life. And so I was living in Germany playing for a team over there. And I just kind of was like, and I'd always been really mindful of what I put into my body, but I was just like, man, something's wrong. Like, I just don't feel my normal energetic self. And at the time I had kind of been more, I guess, like I was one of the first people to like kind of start like the paleo thing. I think somebody wrote an article about me in like 2004 or five.
Really?
This guy, Art Devaney, who had this blog called Evolutionary Fitness, for anybody who remembers him. It was a really interesting guy. And so I'd kind of been doing the paleo thing for a while, but I just was like, there's something missing here. I don't feel right. And I was, kind of really giving you a little bit of a long-winded answer here, but one of the things that was always really interesting to me, just from a purely, and I wouldn't even say purely vanity perspective, but I always thought, okay, hair is like an expression of your internal health. It has to be, and I just don't buy this idea that, because my mom's father and my dad were balding, that I'll go bald. I was like, that makes no sense. Like, so it's just like the lottery, it's like, that just doesn't track well with my experience and anything else. And so I would just kind of like, search around on the internet looking for different, paradigms that talked about the relationship between nutrition and hair. And that was right around the time where Danny had discovered Ray, I think. And so I stumbled onto Danny, and I was just kind of like, wow, this is super interesting. And it was, really random. And I kind of loved his approach of being like, I'm not an expert, I'm a community college dropout. But my experience is telling me, that this Ray Peat guy is onto a lot of really interesting things. And so I was always willing to, make myself like a guinea pig for different things, and started trying stuff that Ray was talking about, like increasing my sugar intake, eating more dairy, more gelatin, I guess, in my diet, because I'd kind of been eating, relatively restrictive looking back on it. And I just immediately felt better. And I was just like, yeah. And anything that I was always kind of very like, anything that intuitively feels good must be good for you. Why would something that feel good not be good, right? Like,
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, so it all started tracking, and I started reading more and more and more, and, finding out that this guy basically had answers for all these questions that had been, burning questions for me forever, and just became really passionate about Ray's work. And, started kind of reading everything I could get my hands on for years and years and years, it seems like. I mean, I tell people, I'm like, I honestly feel like, even though I was sort of like, I think I had a pretty decent vocabulary and a lot of that kind of thing, it was still really difficult reading for me for quite a while, in terms of, you just have to redefine so many terms in your head that have been kind of drilled into you, whether it's like serotonin or anything that's, I always tell people, it's like, it's kind of like we've been taught our whole life that 1 + 1 = 3, when it equals 2. And so if you're kind of trying to do more sophisticated things, but you have this premise that 1 + 1 = 3, then, your math is going to be really messed up by the time you get to the end.
That's a great analogy.
It's like, it's just how to, like, these kind of metaphors where we can try and help people understand like where we're at in the culture. And, especially in the last few years, so many great fictions being perpetuated, kind of in the name of capital and the ruling class and all that stuff. You kind of have to go back. It's so incredible about Ray's work is he goes back and weaves all this stuff together, so you can kind of understand the genesis of how we got to where we are, and which is so important, I think. And so, yeah, so that's how I discovered Ray, and it's completely life-changing. I mean, I've, never been the same, and I'm just I like legitimately wonder how I could exist in this culture without having discovered Ray's work, because it's just been so impactful, and it's just so refreshing. And there's so many, I think, challenges to the modern world, but I feel like understanding Ray's work kind of allows me to kind of navigate them and see them through a more kind of like perspective based in reality. And yeah, that's more or less the story. And obviously discovered, I always joke with people, like, you should have seen the forums back before Georgie. If you think the forums are crazy now, you should have seen them before Georgie showed up, because he wasn't really on the forums back then. I think he came around in like maybe 2014 or something, and maybe 13. And so yeah, trying to kind of like piece it all together back then. He obviously brought a lot more coherence, and there's a lot of online tools that weren't there back in the day, whether it's YouTube videos or the generative energy podcast and all these things. So it's just been really cool to see how Ray's work has just completely exploded, and it makes me hopeful.
It's always refreshing to listen to Ray, and I completely agree with what you were saying. It seems to me that most people take a top-down approach to health, where it's like, X is bad, but they don't really dive into the underlying physiology, where Ray Peat has very much a bottom-up. So it's like, let's start from the cell, the mitochondria, ground zero, and then how can we fill in the blanks in terms of how to optimize that function?
Yeah,
and then everything else will kind of heal itself.
And just such a generalist too, just always kind of directionally pointed in the right direction.
Yeah. So you went from Ray Peat, and then you started diving into electricity and the currents of the body and how all that functions. And for the listener, every single cell in our body generates sort of like a electromagnetic field, kind of like a little Wi-Fi, and they're communicating through each other with these electric currents and all that. And so the essence of your technology and the book, like The Body Electric, which I know your Instagram handle is, which is a cool name. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list. Basically, the idea is that what differentiates the kidney cell, and you can give a better idea, I'm sure, but kidney cell versus a liver cell versus a brain cell is the electrical current that those cells generate. So you put a stem cell, which is basically kind of like an empty copy of a cell. You put it in your brain, it becomes a brain cell. You put it in your kidney, it becomes a kidney cell. And the reason they've kind of figured this out is because every cell is the same genetics, so it doesn't make sense genetically how one cell would differentiate from another. It would kind of just be this big blob of an identical human being. So it's really fascinating technology. How did you end up getting there, and are there any blanks that you need to fill in from what I just said?
Sure, yeah. So that actually came first. So that was when I was when I was injured back I got injured originally my freshman year in college. This was 2001. And just a really weird thing where I stood up. I'd been taking an exam, and we had a really kind of difficult training camp, and it was maybe like the first week of school, and I was taking some kind of entrance exam or something. I don't even remember. And I stood up, and I just kind of felt this pop in my abdomen, and I could barely walk. And that was kind of like, I guess, what started it all. And we went through a lot of, there was a drug on the market at the time called Vioxx that was really harmful. And I didn't learn about this until much later in terms of what role that could have played in kind of like the depression that I went through, and some of the difficulties that I had in terms of recovering. So I think I probably should have been able to recover from this type of injury. It wasn't so dramatic. But yeah, so I basically, would get online and start reading about, tried acupuncture, chiropractic, different types of physiotherapies, and, everything in between. And basically started reading about some different human performance coaches that were having a lot of success, that were kind of more based in, I would say, like the Russian methodologies, which always resonated with me, because I always thought, okay, these guys didn't have near the resources financially that American athletes did, yet they beat the Americans in a lot of things, and had a much smaller population, and all these different things that made them successful. And realized that it was just much less about finding talent and much more about developing talent in terms of like their athletes and what they had. So just kind of became really interested in that kind of perspective, and found a coach that was training athletes kind of, in his words, it was more based on kind of Russian methodologies. It turned out he'd kind of made his own thing, but he introduced me to this type of worldview, and much more holistic. And I think definitely had some missing parts to what he was doing, which is kind of where Ray filled in the gaps, but was using different types of electrical stimulus modalities over the years, and some of them were more successful than others, and experienced experienced a lot of success with one in particular. And so kind of the genesis from our company was saying, okay, that was, really amazing technology. What can we do better? How can we make this, more accessible? How can we make it more 21st century? How can we improve on it? How can we make it, more affordable? How can we educate people better? It's really, it's like culturally different, right, than what's kind of the status quo is, when, pain and injuries and the system is really set up, not necessarily for solutions all the time. I'll never forget when we first started raising money for our business. I was talking to a pain management doctor, and he said to me, "Well, this is really cool, Dan. I'm really interested in it. However," he's like, "I can give somebody an injection of cortisone, and I can do, 10 injections in 15 minutes or whatever, and I can charge their insurance, X, and make, this amount of money. And that's the amount of time I need to treat one person using your technology." And so it's kind of a real eye-opening in terms of, kind of how the incentives aren't aligned in our culture, for solutions and for people to take the time to, create a result and actually, sort of live according to the Hippocratic Oath and do no harm and help people. And so it's just kind of having that experience and what this type of technology did, not only for my life, but a lot of people, because over the years I saw just a ton of people in chronic pain and suffering a great deal, come back from these, so-called injuries that couldn't be healed, and, see them healed in kind of dramatic fashion. And, so we just looked at it and said, okay, we can do this better and improve on it. That's kind of how it all started.
That's awesome. So what was your before and after when you found this technology? What was the shape you were in going into there, probably with an open mind and hoping for a cure? And then what inspired you to do what you are doing today? What was that change?
Yeah, I mean, I legitimately, I dropped out of school. I took a medical semester of leave from Cornell University, which was really hard for me because it was kind of like, I felt like I had worked really hard to try to go to, and when you're a kid, you just don't really know anything about the world. And, you're just like, oh, this is supposed to be a good school. And, this is like a great achievement and all this stuff. And, they want me to play football. So I had a lot of great friends there and was really invested in my time there, and had to drop out because I just couldn't stay healthy and was in, chronic pain every day and was really just kind of losing my mind. So it was really painful to, I guess more or less kind of give up on that dream at the time. And I took a medical semester of leave and stumbled onto, this kind of alternate worldview. And, at the time, I'm originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I grew up mostly in Oklahoma. At the time, the University of Oklahoma football team, historically is obviously really good. They had just won the national championship. And so I was like, you know what? I can't go back to Cornell. It was kind of like, almost felt like returning to the scene of the crime. And they don't give athletic scholarships. And it felt like too much after everything I'd been through there. So I was like, I'm going to walk on at the University of Oklahoma and just kind of make the best of the situation there. And I think, it really speaks to, I basically went from chronic pain for 2 years every day to 3 days, no pain at all. Wow. And I started using this technology. I use it on a lot of my teammates. If any of the audience knows Adrian Peterson, he just recently retired. I used it on him a bunch his freshman year when he was runner-up for the Heisman Trophy, and he used this kind of tech throughout his career.
So you're just sitting there on the sideline. I think you played as well, but everyone's coming over to you instead of the trainer saying, Dan, hook me up.
Pretty much, yeah. It was like kind of scary. We basically had to hide it, which was really frustrating. But yeah, we had to hide it from everybody, and people would come over to my house a lot during the week, and we'd just kind of chill and do treatment. And but it was just kind of silly. There's just a lot of and I get it, it's kind of like these people are professionals. They spend a lot of time, getting their educations and, are invested in kind of what they learned. And so to kind of see these, student athletes that you're in charge of start trying to kind of like take everything into their own hands, it's definitely threatening. But for me, it was just like, I had no choice, I was like either going to go down that path and stay healthy and like get better, or it wasn't, and like I just kind of made that choice for myself that, I kind of had to do what I did to stay healthy. And so I never missed a practice or a game again. Played there a couple years, and for all intents and purposes, had a really successful career for somebody who walked on the team there and got on the field quite a bit. And then went to Northwestern, didn't played in every game there for 2 years, which was super fun. And then, I played in Europe for a few years. So it completely changed my life. I mean, to answer your question, I don't, it's kind of like finding Ray's work. I was kind of never the same after it. And I'm just super grateful for that experience. And, I always am like, it's so weird to think where I would be if that wouldn't have happened, because I just can't really imagine having gotten healthy, because it just wasn't happening. And so we got, my self-esteem and dignity and all that back. So it was great.
That's awesome. Got your mojo back?
Yeah, more or less got my mojo back.
So between, let's say, and maybe you can give an explanation for this, but a very generic stim thing that they, when I was in high school, went to the athletic trainer and they'd occasionally give you stim if you asked for it. And the interactive neuromuscular stimulation that you guys use in the NeuX Tech, what are the primary differences there? Or if there isn't a generic example, could you just give a regular example?
Yeah, totally. So the generic example that a lot of people would think about would be like a TENS unit, or just kind of a classic, what you call NMES, so neuromuscular electric stimulation. Those are both pretty comparable. I mean, they definitely have differences, but just generally speaking, the TENS unit blocks the pain signal. It doesn't do anything to kind of address the underlying cause of the injury, the kind of underlying dysfunction that is, keeping you in chronic pain, or, giving you some type of movement dysfunction, or, however you want to characterize it. So they're just blocking the pain signal. Whereas with what we call interactive neuromuscular stimulation, there are a couple of things that make it unique and different. One is there's a diagnostic component, which is, I think, really cool. And then, to me, makes all the difference. So if somebody said to me, my shoulder hurts, we wouldn't just blindly, put the electrodes where their pain is. We would actually search them. So we might, search up into their trap. Go ahead. Did you have a question?
Yeah. What are you looking for when you're searching for them?
So it's tissue impedance. And that's basically, we call it interactive because there's this dynamic between the person who's applying the therapy and the patient, where you're basically, moving the stimulus throughout the body. And typically, a lot of times the patient will have like kind of a visceral reaction. On healthy tissue, it feels like a light tingling. And then on injured tissue, typically somebody will be like, ooh, like, ow, like, or, they'll have some type of, visceral response where they might move away from it or something like that. And it's basically just, the way I think about it. And there's probably a lot of different ways you could conceptualize it. But it's just, basically that tissue is having trouble relaxing and turning on at the level of current that you're sending into it. So like you can start on a really low level intensity and not find anything. And then as you turn the intensity up, for chronic pain or acute injury or any type of movement dysfunction, you'll find something that's much more acute, relatively speaking, than anywhere else. And so that's just kind of like the signal is going through that tissue, and that tissue is not able to relax at that frequency, or it's not able to kind of accommodate that. And so you're just in the same signal that's finding it is also re-educating that tissue to be able to do that. So it's ultimately kind of, you're sending more energy into the area, and you're kind of getting that area to wake up and turn on and fire again. And how it's, distinct from, conventional stim again is, if I put like a conventional NMES device, I wouldn't be able to search and do that diagnostic part, but also I wouldn't be able to move when you turn the current, when you increase the intensity. So it would create this kind of protective co-contraction throughout the area, and which would be limiting, like you don't want to actually stimulate that type of, it's kind of, I think as it relates to Ray's stuff, I often think about what he talks about with concentric contractions and stuff like that. And so I think that, basically you don't want to create this kind of protective contraction. You want to find the muscle that's, for lack of a better expression, not turning on, not firing, and then you're stimulating it to turn on and shorten and lengthen again the way that, it's designed to. It's kind of like you're finding something that is stuck in protection and is neither shortening nor lengthening. It's kind of the way I experience it.
Okay.
Yeah.
The first thing that came to my mind when you were describing that was like a stud finder. Like, you put the electric thing on the wall and it beep, beep, beep. But that is super fascinating that they actually experience that. Had like they can tell exactly where the point of tissue digression is based on the stimulation of the electrical current.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a lot of exciting things about this technology, but to me, it's one of the more, compelling ones is just this ability to find the weak tissue, and to know you don't always get it correct because there can be a lot of different contributing factors. But for the most part, it's if somebody, typically if we're treating somebody or, one of our customers are treating somebody and that person's not getting better, I think it's typically that, we just haven't searched them comprehensively enough for these weaknesses that are kind of contributing to the overall problem.
So is it possible, let's say theoretically, to literally measure the point of muscular weakness? Like obviously you're kind of measuring it on the external side where you are placing an electric stimulus and then you get a reaction from the client. But is there some kind of tool that you could actually use to get a frequency measurement that says this tissue is not in a healthy state?
I think there is. I've read about different ones over the years, and I know we've talked about them internally. Not really. I'm not positive. I vaguely remember seeing something out of Italy a long time ago that was kind of in that vein. But there's nothing that I've seen that's currently being used in kind of like a big way. But I do think there's a way to do that. If you find it, let me know.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking because it would be really cool to have that kind of data where it's like he started, the rest of the frequency was at, let's say, like negative 60 hertz or whatever it is, and the injured tissue was at negative 10, and then you brought that injured tissue back to the normal values through your therapy.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I mean, I hadn't read. It's funny, we've talked about the body electric. I hadn't read it in so long. I mean, I literally read it 20 years ago and don't think I'd read it since. And I was kind of like reviewing some of it before our call, and I was reminded that a lot of, what that was about was kind of the relevant charges of the different tissues and stuff like that. So it kind of had me thinking like what you're talking about, was maybe worth looking into.
Yeah, and going off of that, how did you guys establish what is, let's say, the correct resting value for, let's say, your bicep or tricep? Or is all muscle the same?
We as a company haven't tried to establish that or anything like that. It's we're really just base everything on results, so it's like, I mean, typically if we're just looking for, one of the things that's also nice about this, if you're thinking about it from like for sports nowadays, they talk a lot about this concept of return to play. Mm-hmm. And knowing kind of when an athlete is ready to return to play. Well, with our tech, as soon as you are able to, the intensity goes from 0 to 100 in terms of how much kind of load you can put into the muscle or the fascia, the nervous system, or however you want to characterize it. And so typically when you're able to get it into those higher intensities, you have a pretty good idea that person is ready to go. And just as importantly, it's really about symptomatic improvement. If I typically expect somebody after any given session, I'm kind of bummed if they're not telling me that they feel 30% better, typically speaking. So it's really just that objective feedback of can you run, can you jump, how do you feel, can you swing a golf club or whatever it is. We're just looking to reduce people's chronic pain.
Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. So my understanding of regular stim is that it causes the muscle to twitch, right? So it provides that electrical stimulation, which causes the muscle to shorten. How does your technology allow the muscle to load while under the electrical stimulation, lengthen while under the electrical stimulation?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a tongue twister, that one, because I think what's happening is it's lengthening after the stimulation. It's relaxing after the stimulation has happened. Basically it's like I think what happens is you have to think about like when you apply the stimulus to the body, it's not, you're not just stimulating the muscle that's directly being stimulated. You're stimulating like the antagonist muscle. Like if the bicep is shortening and firing, then the tricep is going to lengthen, for example. So I think that's really what a lot of people are talking about, is that you're getting this type of reciprocal inhibition from the antagonist, whereas with conventional stim, you would not get that. You'd get this protection that we were talking about earlier, where you can't move. And if you think about, I don't want to teach the bicep and the tricep to contract to shorten and co-contract together. I want to teach them to kind of move in harmony together, which would be, one muscle shortens while the other muscle lengthens. So it's really the combination of the waveforms that allows you to not get this, so-called stress response. So there's, one of our waveforms is pulsed direct current, without getting too into the weeds of, the shapes and different aspects of the current. And the other one is an alternating current. And the alternating current acts like a nerve block, more or less, and kind of keeps you from having that protective response as you're increasing the intensity of the pulse direct current. So that's really kind of, I think, big part of where that innovation is that you're not getting this protective inhibitory response. And then if you're getting the muscles to activate, by, finding out where there's impedance and getting them to turn on and activate and shorten, then you're going to get increased range of motion, because they're maximally shortening, which then has all kinds of, positive metabolic effects and is, I think, generative. And then the more they shorten, the more the antagonist is going to lengthen. So that should increase range of motion and vice versa, so I think it's kind of this like seesaw kind of effect that you get, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. So basically what you're saying is that compared to like a TENS system, a generic stim, it's just going to cause everything to tense up, everything to contract, where you guys are kind of allowing the muscle to contract more optimally, where, one of the agonists, let's say the biceps, is able to fully flex, contract, while the triceps allowing it to relax and lengthen.
Correct. Yes. I mean, like a big thing with ours that's unique is that, a lot of people do exercise with it on, it's not just used kind of in this rehab context. So it's, kind of in vogue in physical therapy and athletic training and, all these different kind of rehab disciplines these days, is that people are getting more away from passive therapy and more interested in active therapy. So, you can do therapeutic exercise while this stimulus is being applied. So you're kind of reprogramming the nervous system, and it's increasing kind of like, it's kind of breaking this compensation pattern that, you've developed from, what can a lot of times be like a lifetime of, accumulated stress and poor posture, or, whatever. There's so many contributing factors to this stuff these days.
I think they actually have it in my gym. I go to like a fancy gym, like a pro bodybuilder gym, and there's these women that walk around with these carts, and I asked them about it. Is that just stim before we were talking? And they said it's basically a fancy kind of thing. And now I'm going to go look. I would bet it's your stuff.
It might be, yeah. It'd be us or probably one of our competitors. Because I think both of us kind of, it was interesting. We launched the company right before COVID, right before the lockdowns. And, so it was kind of interesting. We kind of, I would say, had to pivot into kind of the, fitness world a little bit for that time. And, they really were a contributing factor to our success during that time. And, a lot of people got into walking around the gym using it and stuff like that. I'd love to know. Where's the gym?
In Denver, Armbrust Pro Gym.
Oh, somebody just messaged. That's funny that I literally just heard about that place this weekend. It could be. I'd have to see who else on our team might have it. Could be your competitor too.
Gotcha. So what about your machines allow people to go through an active range or make it part of their passive or active mobility versus just sitting on a bench and getting the nodes put electricity through you?
It's just that it's that background waveform combined with the pulse direct current. It just acts like a nerve block and doesn't cause that co-contraction. I mean, it's such a, I sometimes get reluctant to assign too many words to these things, because like it's more of a feeling and what you see and experience. Because sometimes I think some of the language that gets used to describe some of this stuff might not exactly be accurate for reasons that we were talking about earlier. Like kind of the nature between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I mean, you just don't get that, like this combination of waveforms, you just don't get that protective response. And it's just kind of it's one of those things that typically I talk about it to people and I'm like, yeah, can we just get together and I'll demo it for you? Because it really kind of brings it to life and you've experienced it and you kind of feel what I'm talking about.
Is there any time you wouldn't want to use your technology?
I think, of course, we, recommend people get their doctor's permission and obviously all that good stuff. I think, it's contraindicated for people with pacemakers and pregnant women. Um, but I think in general, it's surprising how many times, it's not contraindicated and, how frequently you can use it. And it's just kind of, for me, it's like, people, like I'll hear from people, they'll be like, oh yeah, well, I haven't used it. I'm just recovering from, whatever, surgery or injury or this, that, and the other. I'm kind of like, well, that's the whole point. Like you need to be using it now. But obviously everybody's got to kind of make their own decisions and do it with kind of the best counsel that they feel comfortable with. But it's, it is like Pete's quote of Blake, right? It is kind of this life delights in life. I mean, you're just putting more energy into the system. And so it is creating this energetic input that has, in my experience, has really positive therapeutic results. I mean, you could, if I really cranked it, you can, it's kind of like, it's like working out to an extent. You could really, if you really pushed it beyond a point that's reasonable, you could make yourself, quite sore. But that's, something that we're really mindful of in terms of how we try to educate people on how to use it. That's not to say that people still don't do it though.
What do you think that soreness would be caused from?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the contraction frequency is really fast, so it's kind of like it's. I mean, I tell people it's kind of like having Usain Bolt's nervous system in the palm of your hand. So if you've never run that fast, and I all of a sudden put this on your quads and hamstrings and stimulate you to go that fast, you're going to be sore. You've just never done it before. You've never. So it's just a stimulus that is, it's just like workout soreness, just a stimulus that you've never encountered, and then the idea of kind of training, right, is to bridge that gap without, too much overreaching, without too much kind of like, with more use stress than just chronic stress.
So, what modalities do you recommend pairing with the INS?
I saw that question. And I don't know. For me, I once I started using this tech, I didn't really get too invested in other types of kind of rehab modalities. But that's not to say. I mean, a lot of our clients or members and customers have great success, integrating it with a lot of other things. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things. I mean, I think just for me, personally, and kind of we're speaking kind of in this, Ray Peat vein to some extent. I mean, kind of just general bioenergetic principles, I think are really helpful in terms of kind of like, making you more adaptive to whatever stimulus you have.
What about in a non-rehab setting? Like say I'm just a lifter or, maybe I want to gain more muscle or, I'm a little sore. When do you use it as a non-professional athlete? It's probably not too high of a risk of getting injured.
Yeah, I use it these days I'm pretty busy and I do like to, be active and be outside. And I spent so much time kind of more of like a almost, like, college football was rather serious and was a little too serious. And so I'm not that keen on like training a bunch anymore these days. But I use it a lot of times just to kind of like connect my body and just like turn everything on and just like, you can feel really like really good in 20 minutes, just like a completely different person. Just by, certain pad placements and integrating it in your body and kind of teaching the body to work, synergistically together. So there's kind of some different, pad placements and stuff that I use it on myself with, or if I have any kind of soreness, I might use it in a very gentle way just to kind of recover myself. The worst, it's kind of funny. 2 summers ago, I think it was, I was playing basketball with my nephew, who's a really great athlete. We were just messing around, and I came down on my ankle, and it was by far and away the worst pain I've ever had in my entire life. And I was like, did I like break this? Like it was just excruciatingly painful. And I wasn't worried about it just because I had one of our devices, but I was just like, man, I cannot believe how bad this hurt. And I went home that night and I didn't even sleep because it was so painful. And I was so kind of in shock that I just like didn't want to do anything. And I just basically laid there and didn't sleep all night. And the next morning I started, and I couldn't walk. I couldn't put any pressure on it at that point. And the next morning I started treating myself. It's on my Instagram. If you haven't seen it, but it shows just how kind of black and blue and swollen it was. And I couldn't walk, and I literally was 100%. That was on a Sunday. I did it on a Saturday. Sunday I couldn't walk, and I was 100% on Thursday. And
Wow.
so obviously use it if I have any kind of acute issues. Use it on my friends and family a lot. I have friends come over, and you just kind of make sure that everybody's feeling good, and just kind of share our message that way. And but yeah, I mean, I use it a couple times a week, just kind of generally throughout my body. But I don't necessarily take it to the gym. But a lot of people do, and it's just kind of like, I think everybody has different goals and stuff where they're at these days.
Yeah. Do you have certain spots that are just, kind of like your back is always itchy in the same spot? You always need that spot to be tight?
Places where I had I ended up having 2 surgeries at the time before I discovered all this. And I don't have any pain there, but it just doesn't quite feel normal, I would say. It's just kind of like restricted and just kind of feels weird. They diagnosed me with hernias, but I never had any inguinal bulge or anything like that. So I think it was a misdiagnosis. And, looking back on it, I think they were just kind of like, yeah, we don't know what to do with this kid. I really think I just tore a muscle in my abdomen really badly. And, it's really uncomfortable and painful. And there's not really an easy way to fix it. So I mean, because I had these hernia surgeries and they didn't do anything. Like, I didn't feel better at all. So I just never really believed in them. And they had the hernia mesh and all that put in. Fortunately, I don't have any issues with that. But yeah, so I just feel tightness from every now and then. But yeah, otherwise, I mean, I think, everybody kind of has these common traps, low back, I think are kind of the common areas where people, could benefit from like some loosening or stuff like that pretty frequently.
What do you think is the benefit of this technology for bringing into the gym in terms of hypertrophy or athleticism or strength?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of different ones. I mean, there's as many benefits as there are kind of like exercise, kind of philosophies and paradigms, I would say, because it's so varied. But the one of the reasons why like the pro bodybuilders are really into it is because they can overload the muscle without having as heavy of an external load, right? So it's not it's not as much external load on their joints, but they're getting just as much stimulation, right? And so that's a big thing. So you're not having as much wear and tear on the joints, which I think is, especially over the long haul with these guys, is really important. And they don't move particularly well, right? Like, so it's like, I'm always like, if bodybuilding were the way to become a better athlete, then, we'd put bodybuilders out on the field of play and they'd, be great. And in fact, most of them would, probably tear a hamstring within like, 10 meters or whatever. And so I think it's really the stimulus forces the muscle to turn on like maximally, right? And so at a really high velocity. And so I think that these types of contractions are just much more generative and much more therapeutic overall. And, I think have just a really broad number of therapeutic benefits, that you could characterize in a bunch of different ways, like it probably improves like vagal tone and, leads to less injury and just improves your overall quality of life. Because, if the muscles are turning on maximally and powerfully, they're supporting you too, and so like gravity is one of the kind of the most ubiquitous stressors we all face. And if your muscles aren't holding you in position and aren't turning on and aren't contracting the way they're supposed to, that force has to go somewhere else, right? And so that force goes into bones and ligaments and tendons and joints and whatever, and causes inflammation, right? Which is all kind of, has this negative feedback loop. So it's all just kind of, teaching the system to turn on and be more, really, I mean, it's like once I finally understood what Ray was talking about with concentric contractions, to contract against a load, I think is the thing. Whereas a lot of people, they're kind of bracing or not maximally contracting against the load, right? And they're having to compensate to move something, which then of course has all these kind of downstream negative effects. So yeah, it's really, contraction velocity, hypertrophy, there's a bunch of different ways you could say that it's important.
How much do you think the stimulus of the electricity is affecting the local, let's say, area that you're applying it to versus the nervous system and its ability to move as a whole?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, you definitely, I mean, I can't really like distinguish them, you know. I mean, you obviously have, um, if somebody's in pain, you obviously feel acutely better in those areas that are being treated, locally, right? But then you have to consider that there are some kind of like more broader systemic effects going on, but I don't know how you would really differentiate from the two.
Gotcha. And then, so for me at home who doesn't have access to any NeuX technology, or any of the listeners, what would you recommend either it gets in place, or like where can they find some of this technology to go and try out?
So on our website, you can go to our website, and it's kind of constantly a work in progress, and something we're seeking to get better at as a company. But you can go to our website and you can find out, where in your geographic area there might be, some of what we call our members, who are people that use our technology, and you can get access to it in that way. There's a lot of different ways in which people are using it out there. So they might be using it more in a rehab setting. They might be using it more in a performance setting. There's a lot of people that are using it kind of in, more like neurological conditions type setting. It's really varied and broad. So that's one way. You can obviously get onto our Instagram. You can reach out directly to our corporate office through our Instagram, or you can reach me on the body electric _ on Instagram.
And I'll put all that in the description as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll do whatever we can to try and, if people are genuinely interested in demo, or finding somebody that they can, get treatment from or get experience to the tech, that's something we try to do for everybody.
Yeah, it was really awesome seeing you guys with Kirk Cousins and a couple other the really up there athletes in the NFL, and I think MMA too. I saw a couple. Or MLB.
Yeah. We're really excited about all those opportunities, and working with these guys, and just kind of continuing to one day at a time kind of more and more make this technology accessible and available to everyone, and just kind of got to keep going here. But yeah, it's been really fun so far.
I'm glad to hear it. And yeah, it's an awesome mission. So my last question for you is, where do you think the future holds as far as using electricity to heal, but maybe also to regenerate, or any other avenues that you think that conduction of electrical currents could have a role in?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cat's kind of out of the bag finally. It's like, I hope anyway. It's like I tell people pretty often, I'm like, I really hope it's us to kind of like completely blow this thing wide open, and it's obviously the goal and everything. I'm like, but if I died tomorrow, or something happened, I think it's going to go on either way. I just don't think you can stop this. It's kind of like, it's in a lot of ways, I think it's kind of like Ray's work, where, the truth is generative in a way, right? Like you can see it, you can feel it, you can touch it. And this is a more accurate reflection of the nature of our reality. And, going back to Ray's, treating the body without the concept of energy is treating dead matter. And so, that's really what we're trying to do. I mean, for me, it's kind of a spiritual mission at this point, where it's like, I just want people to go through that same thing that I went through, where they're like, wait a minute, like, this is crazy. Like, the body is an electrical system. Okay. You can treat the underlying cause of all these issues. And it's a lot of, over the last 20 years, obviously, a lot of people are waking up to these realities. And so it's really encouraging to see. And, I just don't think you can stop it. And that's my hope. And obviously that's kind of what we're all, I think, collectively working towards. And so, really grateful for the opportunity to share this message. And it's just so fun. Seeing all these young people that kind of taking up the mantle and doing all this. It's just, I can't believe just how much all this stuff has grown, especially recently. So it's, I think, to answer your question, I think it's the tide is moving in our direction, and I think this kind of like shift in consciousness that we also desperately need is coming.
Awesome. Well, I think you guys are doing great work over there, and I'm excited to see all those products in the world of electricity really start to get more tapped into. It's going to be awesome to see what the future prevails. But I think that's about all my questions. Anything else you want to add on?
I don't think so. I just really appreciate the audience. This is really fun, and we'll definitely have to get together next time I'm in Denver or whatever, and kind of get you on this tech.
For sure.
Yeah, no, but this is great. Glad we connected. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And until next time, guys, be good.